Hello and welcome to another video by Leadership Society of Arizona. Today our topic is understanding the logical reason to be selfless. Now when I was a kid, I was taught about why we should be selfless, and often it felt like it was relayed like this picture. People who thought of others were selfless and good people. In contrast, those who thought only of themselves were selfish and bad people. And although there's nothing wrong with this view, it just didn't make sense for me. I thought to myself, what's so wrong with only thinking about myself? Why does that make me a bad person? Why should I give up my time and resources to others? How is it fair to sacrifice my chances for happiness to make someone else happy? I know, very selfish questions, but they're honest questions for a teenager. So from a young age, I began to look at it from a different perspective. Instead of using this scale of good and bad, I just wanted to look at what would make me happiest. So I took different extremes. I thought to myself, which would I prefer? To be broke, alone, and stressed? Or rich, surrounded by friends, and relaxed? When it looks like this, the choice was a little more obvious. So instead of looking for what would make me a good person, I began to look for what would make me happy. In my pursuit to be happy as a teenager, I identified there were things I needed to be happy, such as money, a car, and stuff. Lots and lots of stuff. The problem was when I realized that all of these things are tied to people. I couldn't get a job because I was only 14, so it came from my dad. I couldn't drive, so I depended on my mom for rides. And because I had no money, I couldn't buy anything of my own. To my shock, my life was at huge risk. I realized that my biggest risk were these people. For instance, I thought to myself, if my dad were to pass away for whatever reason, what would happen to my money supply? Well, it would go away. I realized that it was in my best interest to keep that man alive. How long? As long as physically possible. So I began to think of all the ways to make his life as good as it could be, so he could be in top shape to do what I need him to do, which is to make the money. I decided I had better do the dishes because every day he gets home and almost has a heart attack when he sees them. And maybe I shouldn't spend too much money because then he'll have to work too hard and work himself to death, all of which would make me less money. And I did the same thing with my mom. I realized even if she loves me and would do anything for me, if she's busy fixing her problems or problems of other people, then even if she wanted to, she wouldn't be able to give me rides. So I looked to see how I could make her life better. I decided to talk to her to make sure she's okay, get good grades so she doesn't have to worry, and be obedient to make her life easier. This way, when I ask for a ride, I get a ride. I did the same for my siblings, and I quickly began to see that being selfless and thinking of others isn't a moral decision, really. It's a question of intelligence. If I had only thought of myself and neglected those around me, I would end up with no money, no rides, and no stuff. I learned it was in my best interest to think and take care of those around me. Thinking of others is what smart people do. It's what smart people do to make life easier. Now this sounds right, but then we think of all those selfish, greedy millionaires and billionaires on Wall Street or in large evil corporations that get ahead by being selfish and greedy. So I thought, if being selfless is what smart people do, how do these selfish people become so successful? And I came to a huge realization. What I learned is best explained through Frank Abagnale, one of the best conmen out there. He started when he was around the age of 16, stealing millions of dollars by impersonating to be different people and forging checks. Some things he was famous for is impersonating an airline pilot for over 250 flights, impersonating being a doctor for 11 months at a hospital. He even impersonated being a police officer, an undercover cop, when he was in jail in order to escape. And one of my favorite was when he stood in front of a bank and he found they had these deposit boxes where all the customers would drop their money off. He placed a sign on the deposit box which read, Night deposit vault out of order. Please make deposits with security officer on duty. And there he would be, standing dressed as a security officer, collecting their money and leaving with it. Such a simple idea. But as talented as he was, you may have guessed it, he was eventually caught and put into prison. He lost everything, and he was first placed into a prison in France, in a cell with no bed, a hole to go to the bathroom, no plumbing, no electricity, never allowed to leave. This 6-foot man entered weighing 198 pounds and left at 109 pounds. Eventually, he was sent back to the United States and finished his punishment by working for the FBI. Now, in later years, movies and books were made about his life, and he would tell people how he'd receive letters and calls, people telling him how brilliant he was, an absolute genius. But he mentions that he didn't think he was either. He said, "I was just a child. Had I been a genius, brilliant, I don't know if I would have found it necessary to break the law in order to just simply survive." He then goes about describing how unhappy his life was. He always felt alone, spending every holiday and birthday in a hotel room on the run, surrounded by people he was fooling who never knew who he was. He recalls when he was in prison, he longed to see his dad again, to tell him how sorry he was. But sadly, he was never able to see his father again. While in prison, his father slipped down the subway stairs and unexpectedly had died. As you look at Frank, you begin to see that in areas where he was successful, it was because of his ability to think of others. He was such a good con man because he understood what others were thinking, how they would act, and what they wanted. In contrast, he was stealing from them and only thinking of himself. And because of that, he suffered loneliness, loss, and the loss of wealth. Today, Frank has taken his ability to understand people, and instead of using it to steal from others, he has established a fraud protection company to protect people from being robbed. And he's now a millionaire and the owner of a very successful company. You'll find not just with Frank, but with any person who is successful in anything, they are only successful in that thing due to their ability to think of others. Steve Jobs was able to know what people wanted, which helped him create Apple. Taylor Swift knows the heart and mind of every teenage girl, and she put it into a song, and people just love it. However, in areas where these people only think of themselves and don't think of others, they will always experience more hardship and pain. In the end, I discovered it's not just about being a good or bad person. I realized that intelligent people, people who get more out of life, more money, more friends, more happiness, and easier life, are those who choose to become selfless.